Welcome to the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. There has never been a better time for writers. More information, options, and opportunities are available to you, but navigating these requires insight. Join Mark Leslie Lefebvre as he draws upon more than a quarter century of experience as a writer, a bookseller, and a trusted book industry consultant to explore and reflect on the writing and publishing landscape to help you make informed choices on your writer journey.
Hello, Reflectives, and welcome to episode 73 of the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. This is your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre. Today's episode is going to be a solo show, which will be a reflection on a book I've been reading and the things it has led me to think about, which include the importance of disconnecting from technology, connecting with the physical world, being in the moment, and the value and benefit that comes with allowing yourself to become bored. In terms of a quick personal update, and it might be an explanation of the slightly different change in audio, is I'm recording this from my hotel room in Cleveland, Ohio, where I'm attending the Rock Apocalypse 2019 writing event run by Thorn and Zach Bohannon. You might remember these authors on a train guys from episode 21 of the Stark Reflections podcast, which was entitled Real World Connections in a Digital World. And see how that ties back to the theme? Jay and Zach are, of course, the genesis of the reflections for this solo episode, not only because I'm hanging out with them this week after two previous failed attempts to meet up with them in person due to scheduling conflicts, but because of their podcast. Now, the podcast is the Career Author Podcast, and they've been talking in the last several episodes over the last few months about digital decluttering and getting rid of all the non-essential distractions that they have, both digitally in the physical world, which can kind of free up some time to do the thing that's most valuable or important to them, which is writing. Now, they recommended on the Career Author Podcast a book by Cal Newport that I started reading, which I'll get into shortly. But that's what inspired the topic for this episode. As I mentioned, I'm in Cleveland at Rock Apocalypse. It is described quite aptly on their website as a world-building experience, writer seminar, and your destination vacation in 2 epic days. That's a really apt description, I think, because this is a really intimate gathering of writers in a workshop held in a meeting room in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland, Ohio, to learn about world building, benefit from a deeper understanding of the story grid methodology of editing and analyzing a story, and to learn about collaboration from 2 guys who've done it quite effectively. Now, this was limited to 15 seats. Very intimate, not a large group of people at all, and that makes a huge difference because unlike some other conferences where there's tons of networking opportunity, this is more of a deep dive into, when you think of niche audiences as a writer, this is a deep dive into connecting in an intimate way with the people in the room because everyone gets a chance to participate in a way that's not possible with such a larger group. Now, a good portion of yesterday morning, yesterday being Wednesday, was, and this is the first week of May, so Wednesday, May 1st, I guess, was spent actually collaborating with some truly amazing writers on creating the background of this post-apocalyptic world, i.e., what's the inciting event for the disaster that sort of ends the world? How is the world affected? How many people are left? What are the dangerous and uninhabitable zones? Where are they? Where are the safe havens? Are there any safe havens? What are the rumors of what happened? Do people know what happened, or is it only speculation? Is there still a government or some sort of governing body in place? What's the state of various communities and cultures? And what do things look like immediately after the devastation? How about 6 months later, or 1 year later, or 5 years later? What about 20 years later, 100 years later, etc.? What's the groundwork is set for the background so that there's a consistent world, each writer then decides what story they will write in an anthology set in this world. When will their story take place in this universe? Who will the story be about? And then obviously, what is their unique tale? What's the theme, etc. And then applying a lot of that story grid methodology to ensure that it has all of the components that make it a full and complete story, the best that it can be. Now, the anthology is going to be published by Jay and Zach's Molten Universe Media, and it's being sponsored by Draft Digital. So the book will be available in print and ebook via all the regular channels and platforms, which is kind of cool. Now, yesterday, as I said, which was Wednesday, May 1st, we also had a couple of special guests come in for one of the sessions, guests from Findaway Voices, who are located in Cleveland, and they did an intimate Q&A with us, which kind of leads to this episode's sponsor, Findaway Voices. Now, how's that for a segue? Eric and Rin from Findaway Voices, again, as I said, based in Cleveland, came in to share some details and answer questions from authors in the group about the various details of their offer to authors, which not only include the ability to use the platform to find a narrator for your audiobook project with guidance. So Rin's role is a casting director, and it actually involves the process of narrowing down to maybe perhaps half a dozen to a dozen of the best voices for each project submitted from a pool of thousands of professional narrators. And you could also use Findaway Voices to distribute your already produced audiobook to a broad global network of retail and library channels, setting your own price on the majority of them. Now, Audible, of course, is a platform that controls and sets the price, but pretty much everyone else accepts the author set retail price, which is kind of cool because it's a platform that allows you to do that. Findaway has promotional opportunities, and author's direct option of selling your ebook directly, which is currently in wide beta release and will be expanding further very soon. And they're also in the process of rolling out a fantastic royalty share program that makes audiobooks more affordable. They've partnered with BookBub to power Chirp, the first major audiobook discount promotion platform, and so much more. Of course, Findaway also sponsored an evening of drinks at a wonderful place called 16-Bit, which was a retro 80s style bar with free video games and a handful of pinball machines. And of course, important to me, an excellent selection of craft beers and also fun custom 80s themed cocktails. Now, you can learn more about Findaway Voices at starkreflections.ca/Findaway. As I mentioned, I've been reading Cal Newport's book Digital Minimalism on my drive from Waterloo, Ontario to Cleveland, Ohio. I read and quite enjoyed Newport's book Deep Work, and so when Jay and Zach mentioned this one, I added it to my must-read list. Now, this book is a bid for Newport to become the Marie Kondo of technology, to help people realize where digital technology brings value and where it takes away value from a person's life. In the book, Newport talks about how Henry David Thoreau and his Walden Pond experience of getting away from it all made a significant difference for him. And again, this was a long, long time ago. He also shares how you don't need to be deeply removed from society, like thrust into the middle of the wilderness, tens or hundreds of miles away from everyone else. That even Abraham Lincoln had a bit of a retreat not far from the White House. And even though he was surrounded by hundreds of soldiers who were just outside this cabin, but that time in isolation and that removal from the Oval Office itself was where he recharged. And there was value in that episode of escape that he could have. And back to Thoreau, Newport conjures up elements from the back to nature philosophy of Thoreau's essay from his speech on walking. And he also talks of the philosopher's walk, the importance of the philosopher's walk in terms of stimulating the mind, body, soul, spirit, etc. And listening to this in the car on the way to Cleveland, I was reminded of something from a little over 10 years ago. So I was living in Hamilton, Ontario, and I was in the process of vying to win a contest on a Hamilton radio station. The station was AM 900 CHML, Hamilton's news talk leader, and it was a show called Talk Show Idol. And the idea was they had different people vying to be on the talk show, and they had to do some bits on the morning show, and in one of the afternoon shows you came in and you had 5 minutes. So it was part of this sort of audition process, and people voted on which of the people they liked, and then people got eliminated, all that stuff. And one of the audition process steps was doing a 5-minute spot. You had 5 minutes in the afternoon. It was like the 3 to 5 time slot, and you could do it on anything you wanted. You had to prepare it. You came into the studio, and they just let you do what you did. And I brought in McMaster University professor and speaker Nick Bontis, who I knew. I'd worked with him at the university. I'd seen him in action. He was an amazing speaker, and he talks a lot about intellectual capital, and I was fascinated by some of the things he had to say. I knew he had some humorous things, so I thought this would be great content because I'm stimulating an intelligent discussion, and I'm bringing in a really great speaker, and all I have to do is throw him a couple softballs and he'd knock it out of the park. And so I did that for the 5-minute segment. I started off by quoting Henry David Thoreau and a bit about how we're too connected, and I set this up, and then I introduce Dr. Bontis or Nick, and we have a conversation. Now that was 5 minutes. Now there was a highlight reel from the radio that I saved that had been on the air that's only about 2 minutes, and I'm going to play it here because I think it's important to look back on this thing from 10 years ago where I was thinking this exact same thing.
Good afternoon, Hamilton. I'm Mark Leslie, here in the AM 900 CHML studios for Talk Show Idol. And I'm calling today's topic, Plugged In and Tuned Out. To borrow the words of Henry David Thoreau, I wish to speak a word for nature, for absolute freedom and wildness. This is a quote from Thoreau's essay Walking from 1862. In it, Thoreau argues for the simple pleasures of walking, of sauntering, of placing one foot in front of the other, particularly in the exploration of nature. His belief is that walking through fields and forests provides freedom of the body, mind, and soul. So what would Thoreau think if he were suddenly thrust into today's society? How would he come to terms with our absolute plugged-in society, our online culture? The fact that people in today's society rarely seem to have time for walks, for sauntering, and when they do, they don't do it one-on-one with nature, but instead they do it with a cell phone or BlackBerry on their hip, with an iPod or MP3 player feeding music into their ears, with half a dozen friends easily available to text them. They do it completely connected. Have we gone too far? Have we removed ourselves so much from the simple pleasures of life that we'll never learn that peace and tranquility again? Thoreau speculated that in wildness is the preservation of the world. What then will save us from ourselves and from the technological advances we've thrust upon that world? And I'm delighted to have in studio with me today Dr. Nick Bontis. Dr. Bontis is the world's leading expert on intellectual capital. What's next? How much more plugged in can we get?
Well, we can get very plugged in. Here, I'm going to give you an example of what your email is going to look like in the next 10 years, all right? Mark, here you go. Here's your first email. Mark, this is your car. You only got one tank of gas left. You got 20 kilometers before you left to get home. All right? Get in there in the next 5 minutes. You get gas at 99.9 cents a liter. Should I take you there? So your car is going to be emailing your fridge. Hey, Mark, you got no more milk left. Go to the A&P. Buy some milk. I know you like milk with your cereal. So picture every inanimate object that you interact with also emailing you. That's what's next.
So this radio spot, as you can tell, I was nervous. I had been on radio before. I had been on national radio. I had been on local radio. I'd even been in that very same studio on different people's shows. But it's one thing when there's a host who's there and they're the professional and they're the radio person, and you're just sitting there answering questions, right? Because you're the expert. That's easy. But I was nervous. My mouth was so dry because this was me. It was my spot. And, and I wasn't just a guest who could sit back and let the host take over. I was, in a sense, the host for 5 minutes. So I was extremely nervous, and you can hear that in my voice. It's cute, I think, to hear that and see it, and to remember just how dry my mouth was. But this was 10 years ago. This was 2008 when I did this. And this is before the major smartphone boom. I mean, I mentioned iPods and MP3 players, and I mentioned texting. The iPhone had only been launched a year earlier, in the summer of 2007. And so it hadn't become the major thing it is now with all of the apps that we depend on, like all of those connectivity things that were just beginning to come out in 2008. So again, I was thinking of MP3 players in the way that people are always listening to music, or for myself, podcasts at the time. But I hadn't imagined what it would become like. And it's so funny because I talk about Thoreau talking about the importance of walking and communing with nature, and I reflect that it's so pertinent to today, 2008. But then another 10 years later, it's only 10 years, not 100 years, how much more connected we are, and it's terrifying. Interestingly as well, I remember when Nick Montes talked about that your technology is going to email you. Well, he was kind of right. You don't get an email from your refrigerator, you don't get an email from your car, but there are notifications and apps that let you know of things. I mean, we all have wiretaps in our house, Siri and Google Home and Alexa and stuff like that, where we're used to communicating with devices and asking it questions or getting it to turn on and off the lights, or play music, or whatever it is that we're doing, or shop or buy things. And it's funny that he talks about email, because email was very popular and prominent then, but now it's becoming text messages. I get messages all the time from different apps based on parameters that I've set for notifications. I get notifications from different apps. And it was funny when Nick was saying that, I thought I was going to respond with something, because I can be cheeky sometimes. So he's like, "Hey Mark, it's your refrigerator, and I noticed that the milk in here is expired, and you should pick some up on your way home from work. Or this is your car, you need gas." Although I'm in the car, I should know that. But then I thought, wouldn't it be neat if your toilet would say, "Hey Mark, it's been a long time since you visited me, so when you're in the grocery store, you better pick up some Raisin Bran or Bran Flakes or something, so you can have a good bowel movement again." But of course, I was a little bit nervous. It's something I would probably say now, because I have no shame. But I thought that would be a funny one. But again, I also didn't want to insult my awesome guest, but I thought it would be a cheeky thing to add. But so I get to say it now, and you guys get to benefit from it now, or roll your eyes and go, "Oh my God, he's worse at dad jokes than ever before." So, but back to Newport's book, and so reflecting on this talk show idol thing, and thinking about what I was thinking about while I was in the car on the way here is, Newport recommends a 30-day digital fast on all the things that aren't necessary. So he says, take your smartphone, take a look at your smartphone, and consider anything that's not essential, and getting rid of it for 30 days. So now he's very clear on saying, make sure that this isn't about convenience versus necessity. One thing is convenient to have, the other one is necessary to have. And also, if you're reliant on this for your livelihood, if you have to check email on your phone for work because you're on call, or you do a job like I have where authors may be reaching out 24/7, that you need to stay connected for those reasons, because it's part of your livelihood, and that makes sense. But what are the things that aren't necessary? And it's interesting just to pause and spend some time reflecting on, do you need to have those things? So Jay and Zach talk about this brilliantly. I'm not going to get into it in too details, but they take all the apps on their phone, they put them in a folder, they shove them all there, and what they do is, over the 30-day period, if they need to use an app, they pull it out of the folder. And over 30 days, if they haven't used the app in that period, they realize that how necessary is that app? And then they delete them. And they don't even have email on their cell phones anymore. Zach talks about, well, I may get a text from my wife, and that's important because usually my wife reaches out and it's important, so that those are the things I keep, but all the other things he doesn't have to keep. Now, I'm aware of the importance of failed diets. And one of the challenges, I think, is sometimes when we set goals for ourselves that are too high, we can fail. So you can say, oh, I'm not going to do whatever, and it's too difficult, and you fail and you give up. And so what I'm a fan of, so even on my Fitbit, to give you an example, again, talking about technology and forcing me to walk and stuff like that, on my Fitbit, they recommend 10,000 steps a day. Well, I set my step goal to 9,000 steps a day for two reasons. It's a little bit easier, and I figure if I can get to 9,000 steps, then I'm sure I can get to it 10,000 because it's only 1,000 more. So I make the goal a little bit easier so I can achieve it, other than getting discouraged and not considering, right? So it's one of those things that I do to psychologically trick myself. And so I think sometimes we set ourselves up for failure when we push too hard. So let's say you're trying to change your diet and not to eat so many fried foods or whatever. If you try to completely eliminate them from your diet, that can work really, really well, but then you have a hankering. So maybe it's okay, to start off with, I'm going to remove these few items from it and see how that goes, and then continue to expand and see if I can get to the next level. That's one way of doing it. Or you can say, I'm going to completely give up chocolate, but I'm going to treat myself, and on Sunday, if I've made it the whole 6 days, on the 7th day I'm going to allow myself a very specific amount so I can satisfy the craving without overindulging. And then that way it allows you to show you have the willpower, and then you think, well, can I go another day? And you can do that thing where you're tracking. It's like, well, can I go one more day without it and see if I can break my old record? So it becomes a game. But so for me, I use a lot of apps on my phone, and I'm aware how connected I am, and perhaps that's causing a lot of anxiety. But what I decided is I'm going to give this a shot. So what I did is there were 2 apps that I found myself spending a lot of time using. They are Wordscapes, which is kind of like a crossword puzzly thing where you have to make words from scrambled letters. And another one was called 2 Dots, which is sort of a connectivity where you have to connect the dots and solve puzzles and things like that. So again, they were stimulating for the mind, and they were great for downtime. So for example, when I'm booting up my computer in the morning, because sometimes it takes forever, 30 seconds to a minute. In that minute, I end up opening up the app, and then I'll play a game of Wordscapes and do the daily puzzle and see if I can get to the next level, or do something on 2 Dots. But I found that what was happening is the computer's ready to go, and I was still going another 2 or 3 minutes. And while it's good to have, the word games, which is, words are important, and strengthening my skill in that regard is always good. But another way of strengthening my skill with words is to read more. And I'm a slow reader, a notoriously slow reader. So what if for those 2 minutes that usually become 5 minutes, what if I've got my Kobo, I've got a Kobo on my phone, of course. I could continue to read the book that I'm reading, or I can pick up the Kobo and read it there, and use those 5-minute spots to read, because that'll actually get me further in one of my other goals, which is to try to read more. So what I've done for May, it's May 2nd as I record this, starting May 1st, and I actually started, I think, April 30th, when I got into Cleveland. I was like, I'm not going to play these games anymore. I didn't actually remove them from my phone. I want to challenge myself with the temptation. I know that's probably not the right thing to do, but I want to have them there and look at them and know purposely that I'm not going to touch them. That's important to me to have that willpower. But for the month of May, I'm not going to play either one of those games. It's a small step, but it's a step forward. And for me, if I can go those 30 days without using those games, maybe I'll treat myself to playing a game again, and maybe after 30 days I'm not as addicted to have to play it every day, and maybe I've gotten more reading done. So for example, I have gotten more reading done. So even sitting here in the hotel room, just kicking back for 5 minutes and relaxing, or when I'm waiting for the Uber to show up, I'm listening to the audiobook rather than playing a game. Or I'm reading. I've got my Kobo, it's portable, and I'm walking around with it. So I'm just opening up the Kobo and I'm reading for a few minutes while I'm waiting for the Uber to arrive. And again, I think it's important to get to those small wins so I can prove to myself that I can do this, and then I can say, well, what are the other things? Maybe I can then look at, what are all those other things that are mere conveniences that I can't go without. So the other thing I did was, when I was coming here, I rely on the GPS a lot on my phone, and that can be an important element. But I was remembering back to the days, and Liz and I were talking about the days when we were teenagers, and we would decide that we were going to meet our friends to go see a movie or go to the mall, and we only had like telephones, rotary dial telephones in our homes. You would call your friend and say, okay, I'll meet you at 3 o'clock wherever, and we're leaving from there. So we'll leave. We'll start to plan to meet around 3. So by 3:20, we're going to have to head to the place. And we managed to survive. We didn't have to text each other, "Where are you? You're a minute late," or any of those things. We didn't need to stay connected. We just went. Maybe we had Sony Walkman or knockoffs of Sony Walkman if we couldn't afford the Sony brand. But we managed to survive and make it. We also managed to get from city to city or place to place using maps. And so what I did is, as I was pulling into Cleveland, I've been here a few times before, and so somewhat familiar with the downtown area, and I knew roughly where the Hyatt was, and I had looked at the map earlier that day before I got in the car. So when I was getting close to Cleveland, I thought, you know what, I'm not going to use the GPS. I'm just going to take the exits that I think are the right exits, or take the exit that I think is the right exit, and I'm going to navigate my way around. Now, I ended up driving around a bit because I kind of had to do some searching, and there were some tricky places where I couldn't turn left where I wanted to, so I had to go all the way around the block. But I was pretty proud of myself when I finally got within a particular radius, and then once I stopped the car and I parked thinking I was pretty close, I wasn't too bad. I was only about a block and a half away around the corner from where I needed to be. And at that point I did just verify. I opened up the phone just to verify. But again, it's one of those things, and I'm aware of the irony, of course, that I was listening to an audiobook in my car on a smartphone device, thinking about how we're way too connected. But the other thing I'd also done is that last 10-15 minutes of the journey, I completely shut off the radio that was on in the background, and I wasn't listening to the book. It was just me in the car by myself, thinking, reflecting on what I'd been listening to, and then trying to find my way to the hotel. Again, I think you can do these things. You can connect with yourself in small ways. You can actually go to a restaurant by yourself and not have to look at your phone every 2 minutes, not have to pick something up. Now, what I do is I bring my Kobo and I read, but what I'll also do is I'll just actually sit and look around. I'm not in nature, but I'm in a natural setting with physical things and stimulus all around me. And I wonder about all the things that I'm missing because I'm attending to something on my phone, or I'm attending to something in the palm of my hand, as opposed to attending to what's going on around me. Maybe missing some things that could be important for me as a writer to observe. Or even walking down the street, purposely not listening to an audiobook or music or a podcast, but actually just walking unencumbered and hearing and seeing and smelling, like using all the senses as opposed to just my eyes when I'm walking somewhere. Even though I do value having a podcast or a book to listen to while I'm walking, because it allows me to multitask. But sometimes when you don't have the input, when it's just your brain in the moment, you give yourself the opportunity to be bored, to not have stimulus, to not constantly be bombarded with incoming stimuli. And that becomes really, really valuable and important for processing. You know, listening. So I'm listening to Cal Newport's book, and it's making me think about things. Okay, I'm going to stop it now. Now I'm going to reflect on that. Now I'm going to think about that. Now I'm going to digest that. And similar at this writers' conference, you know, we talked about the world. We have some ideas of what causes the devastation, and some people have shared some story ideas that they had, and I had something kicking back in my mind. But what I need to do is I need to go for a walk, and I need to not be listening to anything else and just start to think about some of those elements in the story that I'm thinking of, and maybe they come to fruition. So in any case, those are the kinds of things I've been reflecting on associated with digital technology and with trying to get back to nature. And I'm going to try, and obviously I'm doing the app thing for the next 30 days. I'll let you know how that goes. But I'm also going to try to read more, and I'm going to try to not always have to have some stimuli, but actually allow yourself to be bored. Allow yourself to just sit there. Either whether you call it meditation, whether you call it just reflection, whether you call it just being in the moment. I think it's important to let yourself not have that stimulation, so you can be in the moment and you can let your brain just go. Let's let it wander and see what sort of benefits you may reap from that emotionally, physically, mentally. That's something that I think is really, really valuable, and I'm going to do a little bit more of exploration of that, because I am in the process of trying to get a bunch of different writing projects done. And I think if I clear my mind of all the incoming stimuli and the distractions that may be jamming me up, and allow myself some time to pause and absorb and reflect on the things that have come in already, that may give me a clearer route for getting the content that I want to get out, both nonfiction writing as well as fiction writing that I have to do, out into the world. And so that's something that I think is kind of cool. And I hope that was an interesting thing. Perhaps I do recommend Newport's book, but perhaps just talking about those things maybe made you reflect on how connected you may be in things that are necessary versus convenient, and whether or not that's something that is actually making your life better, or is it making your life worse in other ways. Thanks for hanging out with me in this episode. Thanks also to all the patrons of the show. Your support in the podcast means a lot. I hope you're getting value in the extra content that you're receiving. And I'd like to wish a special welcome to new patron, Leanne Beckett. Welcome, Leanne, and thank you for your support. And hey, isn't it so cool that we got to hang out together in Cleveland at the Rock Apocalypse conference? Seriously, it was great to meet you in person after, digitally connecting with you in the past, and also you were the winner of the Mark Leslie Lefebvre Memorial ticket for the previous event that I couldn't make it to, that Jay and Zach held in Pittsburgh. And I hope you're having a safe drive back home. I also wanted to thank folks for commenting on both episodes 70 and 71. I had the contest there that was ended at the end of the day on April 30th. Now, here are just a few samples from recent comments. For episode 71, where I'd asked you to share your favorite book on writing, Sandra said, "Great conversation, Mark. My favorite writing book at the moment is by Margaret Atwood, Negotiating with the Dead, but there are so many fantastic books out there, it's hard to choose." Yes, Sandra, I wholeheartedly agree. It is hard to choose. There's lots of great writing books out there. And Georgia said, "Great episode, Mark. I'm really bad at reading books on writing and should read many more. However, I am finding The Emotion Thesaurus, A Writer's Guide to Character Expression by Angela Ackerman and Becca Puglisi useful at the moment as I edit by WIP. And so I will say that one at the moment. And yeah, that is a fantastic book, The Emotion Thesaurus. So yeah, I have to agree with you on that as well. So thank you, Sandra and Georgia, for the comments. Thanks, everyone, for the comments that you've left. So Sandra and Georgia have been entered into the random draw. So have all the other commenters. But you know what? Heck. I think for taking the time to comment, and especially, sharing character books you'd want to go into, and books on writing. I think everyone who commented prior to May 1st on episode 71, you're going to get the prizes. So those who commented on episode 71, I'm going to get the Story Bundle Writing Package to you, which is the 12 books plus the $50 online course from Dean Last Week Smith. Why not? I'll be reaching out to all of you to see how I can gift it over to you. If for some reason you already have all the books, or you want to re-gift it to someone else, a writer that you think would really benefit from it, heck, just let me know. We can do that too. Why not? I'm just feeling generous. And hanging out with cool writers this week is probably what did that to me, because there's just so much giving in that room. And so the same thing, as I said, goes for the previous episode, episode 70. All the folks who commented on that one, again, prior to May 1st, will be getting Danny's book, and I'll reach out to contact you. That one may require more than just an email if it's the print book that you prefer. Of course, if it's just a Kindle and you're in the US, for example, it's easy enough to gift that to you with an email address. But again, thank you everyone for commenting. Basically, all those who commented are going to get the prizes I mentioned. So I hope that is a fun surprise for you. I hope that is bringing a happy spring to some people, knowing that you guys are out there listening, commenting, and perhaps even reflecting on the things that I'm learning, and sharing that I'm learning is really valuable to me, and I appreciate you guys being out there and for participating as well. And don't feel necessary to participate. The fact that you're listening, I'm hoping you're getting value from it. That's the most important thing. So if you do find value in this, feel free to share the podcast with a friend, or feel free to leave a review on the podcaster of your choice. But the most important thing you can do is to come back and visit me next week in episode 74. Episode 74 is most likely going to be a panel discussion that was recorded here at the Writers' Workshop. It was four of us answering. Zach did a great job of moderating and asking us some really fun questions, and it's basically four of us answering them, and I think there's enough good value and content there to share in the next episode. So I look forward to hanging out with you in episode 74 next week. But until then, here's wishing you great writing and good Stark Reflections.
Thank you for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. You can find show notes for each episode at starkreflections.ca.
The music for this podcast, Laser Groove, was composed and produced by Kevin MacLeod. Check out more of Kevin's great music at incomptech.com.